Well, for some analysis now, let's bring in Middle East analyst Khaled Yaqub Awais. He joins us here in the studio. Good morning. Thank you so much for being with us. Khaled, the bombing campaign in eastern Ghouta has claimed hundreds of lives this week alone. What are Syrian forces hoping to achieve with this?
They're not just only Syrian forces, they are regime forces, Assad's forces, with allied militia from Iranian-backed militia, Shia militia, the equivalent, if you want, to what's called Sunni terrorism. You have, on the one side, you have Sunni forces fighting the regime of Bashar al-Assad, and it's a sectarian Alawi regime allied with Shia militia backed with Iran. So they are facing a double-pronged attack from the Syrian regime and the Russian and Iranian-backed militia and forces. It's trying to achieve population transfers, I think not dissimilar to what you have seen in Europe some time ago here, and cleansing the Sunni population that is opposed to Assad and the rebels that are actually in Damascus. We call it Eastern Ghouta, but it is, other than administratively, it is Damascus.
It's a kind of a suburb of Damascus, Eastern Ghouta. You know the area well. You've served as a correspondent yourself in Damascus. Now, the Syrian regime says there are thousands of opposition fighters in Eastern Ghouta, some of them affiliated to Al-Qaeda and to Islamic State. What can you tell us about that?
Well, first of all, there has been, I don't think there is many Islamic State, if there are any there, because the rebels themselves have fought off the Islamic State and expelled it from Eastern Ghouta. There might be, and there probably is, Nusra fighters, but we have to make a distinction between Nusra affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Syria, which is a very Syrian phenomenon, and it's different than the internationalist jihadist agenda of Al-Qaeda. These are more local forces with different ideological bends, including sometimes Al-Nusra, which actually is a minority in Ghouta.
But the government obviously perceives them as a fundamental existential threat.
Well, and they see I think for one purpose or another, let's call it a regime. The Syrian Prime Minister, for example, who is a Sunni figurehead, has no idea what Assad's forces are doing and has no control on them. So it's a regime, not a government in the sense, let's say, Switzerland. Okay.
This is a very complicated conflagration in Syria, the civil war. There are many different factions involved. Even within the regime, it's not really clear who's in charge sometimes. People on the ground in Eastern Ghouta say that Russian planes are involved in the bombings. Do you think that's the case?
This is something I'm sure Western intelligence and US or European or German intelligence would know exactly. The British, for example, have a big radar base based in Cyprus, and they would know exactly who is bombing Eastern Ghouta. But regardless, Russia is equipping and arming and maintaining the Syrian planes. And without Russian support, or Russian permission, you'd have no Syrian Air Force flying.
I want to talk for a moment about the UN Security Council. They've been meeting on this issue. They're calling for a 30-day ceasefire in Syria. Russia's blocking it, saying it's unrealistic. What's standing in the way of an agreement?
Look, Russia might get their way and say yes, play for time, and agree for so-called ceasefire as long as the population transfer, as long as these green buses, the infamous green buses, carry Sunni families and Sunni fighters and Sunni civilians and move them thousands of kilometers away from their homeland and their homes.
Khaled, thank you so much for talking with us this morning on DW News. Middle East analyst Khaled Yaqub Awais.